Alright, so let's go forth and revise for the Meiji Restoration. Now, first thing that we've got to do is go over the syllabus. Okay? Anything that we study, like the last ones that we've studied, have to go over the syllabus first thing. Okay? So the Meiji Restoration syllabus is actually quite short. And you don't have to do too much for it. It is quite a limited time period. Because it's a limited time period, it means that you have to know additional details in the years. Okay? The longer a time period, the less detail you need to know. The shorter it is, the more detail. Okay? So when we're looking at the first dot point, historical context, it's basically just setting up everything for the Meiji Restoration. Okay? What happens to make the restoration occur? Okay? That is that entire dot point. Okay? So if you look through it, it goes key developments that allowed modernisation to take place in Japan. For example, the decline of the bakufu, the changed role of the samurai, then the arrival of the black ships, and Commodore Perry. Okay? Everything in that dot point is basically what starts the Meiji Restoration. What goes wrong that it becomes necessary. Okay? When we look at the second dot point, the nature of the Meiji Restoration, it's all about basically what were the reforms of the Meiji Restoration, what did they change, what were the impacts of that change. Were people happy or upset with those changes? Okay? Go through those dot points. How and why Japanese modernisation occurred. Okay? Now, two of the most important Asian words that you get in this entire topic is modernisation and westernisation. Okay? When we say Seishin or Asian, what does that normally refer to? What is that normally the verb for? If we say urbanisation, for example, what does that mean?
Process, kind of.
Yeah, it's a process, exactly right. When we say something is a process, a seishin, we're saying it's in the process of becoming something else. So if we're having westernisation, what are we having?
Becoming more Western.
Yeah, you're in the process of becoming more Western. If it's modernisation, you're in the process of becoming more modern, exactly right. Okay? So modernisation and westernisation, you can't get away from this topic without knowing those two words because they basically explain every one of the impacts and effects. Okay? Reforms happen, you become more modernised and more westernised. Okay? The role of individuals and groups in the Meiji Restoration. Okay? Obviously, you can't get away with not knowing who Emperor Meiji is. The time period is sort of named after him. Okay? You should know people like Seigo Tokumari, the leader of the Samurai Rebellion. And you should also know your chief of privy states and things like that. Key figures that make the Reformation possible and those that have big impacts. Okay? One of the common overlooked people is Commodore Perry and President Fillmore. Okay? Because people basically look at them and they go, oh, they're outsiders, they're not Japanese. We don't actually need to know about them. But we know, of course, President Fillmore and Commodore Perry have quite a big impact, don't they? Okay? They're the guys that really kicked Japan in the butt and let the modernisation process begin. Okay? So you have to know their names at the very least and what they did to Japan to make the modernisation happen. Okay? Consequences of modernisation for Japan, the region, and the emperor. Okay? So what happens to Japan when it gets modernised? Okay, well, we know that social classes begin to change. Okay, the samurai become steadily less important, and that they are eventually evicted from Japanese society. Okay, we know that Japan goes through a period of modernisation, and when a country modernises, what else does it do? Starting with an I. It industrialises. Okay, now, who can remember what was the main reason for Japan industrialising? Why did they feel it was absolutely necessary? What was knocking at their front door?
The steamships.
The steamships, exactly, okay? They had the steamships that knocked into Edo. And what took control of those steamships? Starts with an F. Foreigners. Okay, the reason we have to industrialise in Japan is because we're not strong enough to fight the foreigners, is what the shogun and the emperor are saying. So the primary reason for industrialization in Japan is basically they saw the foreigners and they went, yoinks, we've got to do something, otherwise they're going to take over us. Because what happened in China next to Japan? They had something called the Opium Wars. Okay? And Japan basically watches China get divided up between Russia, Britain, France, Germany, and the Dutch. And they go, we don't want that to happen to us. What was wrong with China? They didn't industrialise, so when the British and European armies came in, they just got annihilated. We're not going to do that. We're going to have guns as well, and we're going to be able to fight the Europeans back so that they don't take Japan. Okay? The consequences of modernisation for the region, okay, so looking at that area of Asia in particular, what do you think the consequences of Japan modernising might be for the region?
Korea and the neighboring countries also wanting to modernize.
Exactly right. Korea and the neighbouring countries want to industrialise and modernise as well, but it also means Japan starts to become this sort of vampire for every other country, and that they start sucking their resources dry because they basically look at the Western powers, like Britain and France, saw what they were doing to all the other Asian countries, invading them, colonising them, stealing their resources, and Japan went, well, we need to do that so we can catch up. So the Japanese start building their own, starting with an E. Empire. Okay, they build their own empire. You start getting the Japanese empire taking root. What's the first country they take over? Big old K, you love the music from it. Korea. Okay, they take over Korea. And the emperor. What's the consequence of modernisation for the emperor?
Loses his power.
Does he?
Doesn't he gain it back?
Gains it back and then loses it and gains it, sort of like a cyclical thing. Okay, because keep in mind, Meiji Restoration. Okay, what does restoration mean?
Revive
A revival, exactly right. What are we reviving?
his power.
The imperial power in particular. Because what has been sitting on imperial power for the past 600 or 800 years?
Shogun.
The shogunate, okay, or the bakufu. Okay, doesn't matter which one you use, by the way. The significance, growth of Japanese militarism and imperialism following the Restoration. So one of the things that we have when the Restoration happens is the military slowly, I wouldn't even say slowly, it happens quite quickly, sinks its claws into Japanese social fabric. Okay? When the Restoration happens, basically the military starts taking control of every aspect of Japanese life. Okay? When the Restoration occurred, how did they want society to be structured? Started with D. What was their grand ideal with the charter that they first made?
Oh, democracy.
Democracy, yeah. They wanted a democracy, supposedly, at the very start of it. They wanted everyone to have a voice, everyone to have a vote. What starts to happen? Well, you start to get a lot of officials taking control, and then the army starts taking control from them. The reason why that's really, really important is because when you go onto your HSC, you look at Japan, okay, the lead up to World War II, the nature of its dictatorship, and World War II itself, and you learn why the military is in such control of the country. It all begins from here, okay? Because who used to run the country before the Meiji Restoration? Which social group?
The samurai.
The samurai. What was samurai's main job?
Protect.
Protect. Warrior, okay? So they still have this warrior mindset, the entire country, and they're still used to being ruled over by warriors. So it makes the military assuming control that much easier to accept, because they've just had 800 years of it. What's the new guys? They've got guns, that's all that's different, okay? The significance of the Meiji Restoration in Japan, Asia, and the reactions of the West, okay? More of what we just said. And then a relevant historical debate or issue. For example, the Meiji reforms, oppressive and reactionary, question mark. Okay, so were they good or were they bad? So, looking at this, okay, looking at our first dot point. Historical context, the decline of the Bakufu or shogunate. Okay? When you're taking your dot points, you should be trying to divide them into these three things when you're studying. Okay? So, when we look at this one, what sort of terminology might we associate with the decline of the shogunate? Okay? Is there any specific terminology or key words that we pick up and go, hey, that's a word that I should use when I'm talking about this dot point? What about social classes?
Hierarchy, social
Hierarchy, yep. Who's really important on our social hierarchy for this dot point? The samurai and the emperor, exactly right. Okay? So when we look at our social hierarchy, which is our key word, okay, and we look at samurai and imperial restoration and emperor, these are all key terms that we should be looking at. Okay, and we should be attempting to drop in our answers for this. Okay? When we look at events, what sort of events might we connect with this dot point? What events lead to the fall of the shogunate and the decline of it?
The arrival
You're right.
of Perry.
The arrival of Admiral Perry, or Commodore Perry, and his black ships. We know that that greatly weakens the shogunate power. What else? Were there events that led up to the shogunate collapsing, or did they suddenly just collapse out of nowhere?
What the samurai rebellion?
That's after the fall of the shogunate.
Is it the treaty they signed with?
The Treaty of Kanagawa, okay? Remembering that the Japanese sign a treaty with the foreign powers, which is grossly unequal. What else? The Battle of Toba Fushima. Okay, if you remember, the Boshin War, do you remember what that is? It's when the imperialists fight back against the shogunate forces. Okay, and they basically kick him out. What I'll do is I won't go through these ones, okay? I'll let you think about those when you're at home, okay? And when you do those, I want you to try and think about what you might put in each one of those, okay? Because you should be able to fill out all three of those for those dot points, okay? Because you definitely have all three worth, okay? Won't go through that one. What we'll do is we'll go through the questions that Mr. Smith sent me, okay? So these are the ones that he said will definitely relate to your examination. Now, the first one that he asked us to go through is the social issues prior to westernisation. Now, thinking about that dot point alone, it means that there's problems in Japan before the Westerners come, okay? And these problems are only compiled or built up when Commodore Perry arrives, and then they sort of all erupt at the same time, okay? If you remember when we were doing Russia a while back, we basically said, when the Tsar came to power, it's not like Russia was perfect. He didn't come to power and everything suddenly went wrong. There was already problems, okay? He's just the guy that sped up the problems. Well, Japan's exactly the same. When Commodore Perry comes to Japan, it's not like there's no problems already. There's already long simmering problems. He's just the guy that speeds up the decline of the shogunate, okay? So, what's our social issue? Well, we have encroachment of Western religion and culture, which is seen as pervasive, okay? Meaning they don't like it, they think it's perverse, they think it's wrong. And they also think it's trying to sneak into the country. In some ways they're right, because what do you get trying to sneak into the country? Starting with an M and to do with religion. Missionaries, okay? You constantly get Christian missionaries trying to sneak into the country, okay? Trying to spread the word. So you have an edict by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who is the kind of shogun before the first Tokugawa shogunate, okay? And he puts a ban on missionaries to ban missionaries upheld to preserve a cohesive society. You also have the seclusion edicts. And the seclusion edicts are the ones enforced by the Tokugawa shogunate that close the country Does anybody remember for how many years?
200.
200, bingo. Okay, closes the country for 200 years. Does it fully close off the country completely and everything?
No.
What's the exceptions?
Trade.
Trade?
With Korea and China.
Trade with Korea and China, correct. And only one Western power,
Oh, the Dutch.
the Dutch. So they're allowed to trade with the Dutch, only the Dutch, specific things. The Dutch are not allowed to preach their religion there. And there's only one port they can trade at. Does anybody remember what it is?
Edo.
Not Edo? That's too close. They don't want them anywhere near the capital. They will infect the people.
Nagasaki Harbor.
Nagasaki Harbour. Okay, good. So, the Tokugawa shogunate upholds stability for 200 years after Sengoku Jidai. Okay, you ever heard this term before, Sengoku Jidai? Okay, basically Sengoku Jidai is what happened before the Tokugawa came to power. It means country at war. Japan's at civil war for itself for about 150 years before the Tokugawa come along. Tokugawa's main claim to fame, saying that they continue to be shogunate, is they say, hey, remember how we ended 150 years of civil war? That's why we should be in power, because we're the guys that bring peace and stability. But what happens when the Tokugawa shogunate can no longer prove that they bring peace and stability? Okay? Their image starts to become a bit shaky the more unstable things get. And the more shaky their image becomes, the less people are willing to fight for them and believe in them. Okay? Social cohesion is maintained primarily through the autocratic control of the shogun. Authority is found in power. All authority in Japan is found in power at this stage. If you cannot enforce your power, if you cannot make people listen to you, then they're just going to walk away from you and find someone new. So if the shogunate ever becomes weak, they're going to push it over, first thing. Okay? Because that's how they rule. Peasants are heavily taxed and forced to borrow off the chonin, resulting in occasional peasant revolts. Who knows what the chonin are?
They're like the
Merchant class, very well. I wouldn't say middle class, because that's a dangerous word to use in Japan, okay, at this particular time period. Because where did a chonin feature on the social hierarchy?
No, in the bottom.
At the bottom, okay? The Japanese follow a Confucian hierarchy. They hate merchants because they don't think they contribute anything to society. They think they're just leeches and vampires, basically. So they have more respect for a peasant and a farmer than they do from merchants.
Nice.
Okay, rice. Yeah, yes. Okay, it's an old Buddhist and Confucian thing. They do not like merchants, okay, because they don't produce anything. They just take people's money. Okay, so the chonin are not liked in the Tokugawa shogunate days, but there's a problem. The chonin produce most of the money, so they sit very low on the social hierarchy, but they produce most of the money. Do you think they might feel a bit angry at that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay? So, we have this idea of splendid isolation, which is the seclusion edicts. Okay? Separating the country from the rest of the world. It's important to realise that seclusion edicts and this isolation of Japan isn't a new thing. As we were talking about just at the very start, you have the Toyotomi family, which comes before the Tokugawa, and they basically say, we don't like foreigners either. So this whole non-foreigner idea in Japan isn't something new done by the Tokugawa, but they're the ones that sort of make it a law. Okay? So, what type of rule do we have in Tokugawa Japan? We have feudal rule. And you might remember feudal rule from when we were doing year 8 history. Okay? King at the top, peasant at the bottom, everyone's fixed into their places. You can't move up, or well, you definitely can move down, but you can't move up. Okay? So feudal rule is imposed by the Bakufu and locked everyone into their place on the social hierarchy and prohibited innovation despite changing times. It becomes very hard to innovate and technologically advance a society when everyone's locked into those social positions. Okay? Samurai stipends, do we all know what a stipend is?
Tax?
Not a tax, it's a wage, a salary, a pay. Okay? So samurai are paid in stipends, and they were still paid in rice at the beginning. However, just prior to the Meiji Restoration, they begin getting paid in currency, okay, money. The problem is, when they start getting paid in money, in real terms, their money is actually worth far less than what it should be. Okay? So a lot of samurai are becoming broke and poor by this time period. Okay? The continued economic pressure and Tozama daimyo having to continuously travel to Edo for the same kotai meant they could not afford too many samurai retainers. I've mentioned this one to a couple of you before. What's a Tozama daimyo? Means outsider. Okay? These are the ones that sit either at the far north or the far south of Japan. The reason why is because when the Tokugawa shogunate first came into power during the Civil War, these were the guys that stood against them. So they put them to the basically rural ends of Japan where nobody wanted to go. They said, you're here now. And then, to further add insult to injury, every year you've got to travel to Edo. The reason why is back then it takes a lot of money to travel to Edo. So what they did was they kept on making these lords travel to Edo, constantly draining their funds, so they'd never have enough money to build up an army and challenge the Tokugawa. Okay? So you have this constant thing where everyone's being taxed, nobody has any real money, and because all these daimyo are being taxed, they can't afford all of their samurai. Okay? What do you think's happening to those samurai? They're getting fired, basically. Okay? The daimyo says, we can't afford to support you anymore. Why do I need 1,000 samurai when we're at peace? We're not in civil war anymore. We're not at war with any foreign country. I'm going to let you go. Okay? What do we call those samurai without a master? Ronin. Exactly right. Masterless samurai. So now you have thousands, tens of thousands of samurai wandering around Japan with military training, military weapons, with no master. Do anyone want to guess what the problem is there?
They have no job.
They have no job. What do you think they're going to do?
They're going to be thugs.
They're going to be thugs, they're going to be robbers, they're going to become bandits. Or even worse, unemployed people with military technology and military training are often always looking for something to die for. Do you think they're going to be very fond of the shogun? He's the guy that lost them their job. What do you think they're going to do? Exactly right. They're going to be working with anyone that stands against the shogun. Okay, all of these masterless samurai now are wandering around Japan looking for something to do. And ingrained within their culture is this idea that I have to die for someone. Okay, it's Bushido. You got to have a lord, you got to die for someone. Well, I don't have a lord because he sacked me. So who am I going to turn towards? I can't go towards the shogun. Anyone have a guess? Who sits above the shogun? The emperor. Okay? The emperor sits above the shogun. So now all these ronin are basically going, I should support the emperor. This sounds like a good idea. Gives me something to fight for. Okay? Peasants were heavily taxed to pay for extensive samurai retinues, but not enough samurai are dying. Previously, this wasn't a problem because you had lots of wars. Lots of samurai would die, not too many of them. You don't have to pay too many of them. Everything works out fine. Okay? Countries at peace for 200 years, too many samurai, not enough of them dying. We need to send them somewhere to die. Okay? The chonin and money-earning class continued to be heavily taxed to pay for everything. The shogun continued to renege on debts, meaning not pay them. The chonin are still the lowest on the ladder despite their rising importance with the economy, changing from agrarian to exchange. Okay? So basically what happens is the shogunate goes, I need money. The chonin goes, no worries, we'll give you a loan. Then 10 years' time when the chonin go, hey, your loan is due, the shogunate goes, lol jokes, I'm not paying. Okay? The thing I really like about the shogunate of Japan is it manages to annoy all three social hierarchy classes at once. It annoys the daimyo because they have to travel to Edo every year and because they have so many Tozama daimyo. It annoys the samurai because so many of them lose their jobs. And it annoys the middle class because they don't pay their debts. And also it annoys the fourth class of the peasants because now they don't have enough food. They effectively annoy all four at once. Okay? Superheroes. So, this is our social hierarchy for Japan at this time. Okay? Now you can see here Emperor sits at the top, but what's underneath it?
Figurehead.
Figurehead. What's a figurehead mean? It's someone who actually doesn't have power. Okay? They might sit at the top of the social hierarchy, but it doesn't actually mean that they have power. Okay? We might call a figurehead a ceremonial leader as well. So whenever there's a religious ceremony or some sort of ceremony, okay, they go out, they shake hands, then they go back inside because no power actually resides with us, with them. Who's the figurehead in Australia?
The Governor
Governor General or Queen. Okay, yes, they do have some political power, but do they actually get in the political ring very often? No, very, very, very rarely. Okay, we say they're a figurehead. Okay, they are effectively the head of our country, but they don't really do too much. Okay, the emperor is the figurehead of Japan. Real political power, of course, lies with the shogun. Then we go down, down, down. Okay, daimyo, samurai, ronin, peasants, artisans, and merchants. Okay. So, first question. Okay, I'll give you a minute. Write down what economic changes led to the increase of ronin. Okay. Okay. Who can give me, not paragraph form, just some dot point answers, who can tell me what economic changes led to the increase of ronin in Japan? Come on, there's at least one. Yeah, Lorraine.
Change of currency that you mentioned before.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we had the change of currency. What was the previous form of currency? Rice. What did it change to? Money, effectively. Okay, it changed to actual paper money. Okay, or no, it wasn't paper back then, it was some sort of coin. Either way. Okay, so you changed from rice to paper or coin. What's happened with that? What happened to the samurai? Did their pay go up or down? Down. Okay, because previously when they were paid in rice, they used to be able to take said rice to the market and then they would sell that rice for other things. Everybody wants rice, everybody's hungry. Okay? When they start getting paid in money, however, it's worth far less than the rice is. Okay? And they just, most of these lower class samurai go further and further down into poverty. Okay? They actually get to the point where a good number of peasants are richer than the samurai. And that the samurai themselves have to start farming like a peasant. Okay? You can imagine how that would make the samurai feel. They're feeling like they should actually be better than these peasants. They higher up in the social hierarchy. Why should they be farming? And they're looking at the shogunate going, you've allowed this to happen. You've allowed the social hierarchy to be warped and perverted. Okay? How would an increase in Ronin through Japan lead to social instability? What do you reckon?
It's too much of one social class.
Mm-hmm. So too much of one social class, okay, the social class of the warriors is getting too big. What else? Keep in mind, it's Ronin in particular, not samurai. What were we saying about Ronin? What are they always looking for? Someone to die for. Okay, what do they have that peasants don't?
Skills.
Weapons and skills to use them. Okay? What's the overall situation in Japan before Commodore Perry arrives? Would you say it's good, bad, or somewhere in between? Yeah, I think we can safely say it's somewhere in between. It's not the worst, but it's certainly not the best. Okay? What's the situation after Commodore Perry arrives? Better or worse? Worse. Okay? The Western countries start milking Japan for all of its resources. They're not getting really anything back. They see foreigners everywhere, and there's a whole bunch of unemployed samurai seeing all these foreigners walking about when they know that their one job was meant to be to keep the foreigners out. Do you see how so many Ronin might cause a problem? Okay, who are they blaming for their problem? The shogun. Okay, good. So, the changes to these social issues and what caused it. Ineffectual governance, the Tokugawa shogunate, led to corruption and hatreds towards the Bakufu system. People began turning towards an imperial ideology and worship. So people are basically saying this shogunate is useless. We need to turn back to something purer. Well, they don't really understand democracy. You don't go from military government to democracy just like that. So what do? They turn towards something older. The emperor. Now the emperor hasn't ruled in about 1200 years, okay, since the first shogun took power from him. But they're basically looking at that going, hey, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe the emperor was meant to rule in the first place, and that's the reason why we've had so many problems. Okay? So they start going towards an imperial ideology, the fact that the emperor must be in charge. Okay? Imperial ideology turns to xenophobia towards Westerners. I like this word, xenophobia. Does anybody know what it means?
Fear of outsiders.
Fear of outsiders or foreigners. Okay? So they have this intense fear of foreigners. Some would say it still exists in Japan today. Okay? And this only becomes worse after Perry. Okay? They didn't like foreigners in the first place. When they see Perry strolling into Edo Bay, they go, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Okay? These Westerners and then the shogunate are blamed for every single bad thing that happened to Japan afterwards. Okay? Because they look at the Westerners and go, you're ruining everything, and then they look at the shogunate and they go, you're the ones that allowed the Westerners to ruin everything. Okay? The arrival of Commodore Perry into Edo in 1852 and the shogun's inability to do anything about it shook his power base. Remember, the shogun only rules because he can prove that he's the strongest. When Westerners come in on their little black ships and just roll into Edo Bay and the shogun's unable to do anything about it, what do you think people think about the shogun? He's ineffective, he's weak. Okay? He can no longer rule. If he can't protect us from the Westerners, what's he good for? There's a reason we had a shogun. It's a military government. We want a good military. If that military government no longer works, we've got to get rid of it. Okay? The embarrassment led to the rise of expel the foreigner and revere the emperor, or the Sonoji movement. Okay? Courtiers follows this, but the shogun and many daimyos see the threat and are forced to agree to US demands under the Kanagawa Treaty. The shogun begins to import Western ships and guns rapidly to build up the government army to prevent this from happening again. Now, this is a lovely thing to look at because All 4 common bases hate the shogun, but only the shogun has to deal with the whole threat that the Westerners are actually coming. So the emperor and the imperial courtiers, those that serve the emperor, they're all going, no, we have to fight the Westerners. We've got to kick them out of our country. You're just a coward. The shogun's sitting there going, you're idiots if you think we're fighting them now. They've got 10 times the guns we do, and they'll absolutely mop the floor of us. Let's wait until we build up our guns before we do anything stupid. But the emperor's followers are like, no, we've got to do it now. Let's go. Nothing bad could happen. Let's go. Okay? The shogun's stuck between a rock and a hard place. He can either support the emperor, try and fight the Westerners, they'll absolutely destroy him. Or he can attempt to wait, in which case his own people will destroy him. It's a terrible position to be in. Okay? What's the shogun start doing? Well, he decides to start waiting, and he's going to build up all of his guns and all of his navy in an attempt to eventually become stronger. Okay? So why is the Treaty of Kanagawa important? The Treaty of Kanagawa, or the Perry Treaty, is important as it was a formal acknowledgement of Japan / the shogunate's weakness. It's a formal thing. Japan basically just says, we're weak, we can't do anything about this. Okay, it's an embarrassment for Japan. It ended seclusion edicts, allowed foreigners to start entering Japan and Edo in greater numbers. It opened the ports of Shimoda, Izu Peninsula, and Hakodate to American ships. It gave biased trading tariffs to Americans and extraterritorial laws to their citizens not subject to Japanese laws, which would incite the samurai. This is the one I would say is probably the most important one. Okay? First of all, biased tariffs, which basically just means that the foreigners are able to take Japanese goods with barely any tax and then ship over American goods to Japan without any tariff tax. It destroys the Japanese economy. Okay? It sinks overnight. Everyone goes under a period of inflation, and it's not good for anyone in Japan, except for the foreigners. The foreigners cause this immense economic problem, and then they only make things worse by these extraterritoriality laws, which basically means an American could murder a Japanese citizen and not be tried by a Japanese government. They would be shipped back to America to face trial there. Now, if you're a samurai and your whole gist is to protect the country, you've got to think what that would mean. Okay, that would mean that you've effectively been conquered and you're admitting it. Okay, and these conquerors are wandering down your street with no care in the world. And the shoguns allowed that. Britain, France, Holland, and Russia then demanded similar unequal treaties. So now all the Western powers are piling in, going, no, I want a treaty just like America. Okay? This treaty then led to the Treaty of Edo in 1859, where the Tokugawa fully ended splendid isolation. So they just opened up the country. They realised they couldn't stop it anymore. So how did the emperor and society respond to this? Well, we talked about this 2 slides ago. The emperor was disgusted with this, and his unrealistic position did not account for Western dominance. He refused to give royal consent for the treaties, making it seem like the shogun was acting without the emperor. So what happens, okay, is the emperor basically goes, no, I'm not signing off on this deal. This is a horrible deal. The shogun basically goes, you have to. If we don't do this, we're all going to die. The emperor goes, I don't care. And it looks like the shogun is actually acting against the emperor's will. So now the emperor looks like a bad subject. Because remember, the shogun looks like a bad subject, my apologies. Because remember, the emperor's still at the top. The emperor's not meant to intervene in political situations, but now he's sort of not doing what he's meant to be doing, and the shogun's sort of left stranded by himself. Now he has to take full responsibility and blame for everything that goes along. The Sonoji, what's Sonoji mean?
The rise of the emperor.
Sorry?
The rise of the emperor.
Yeah.
Expel the foreigners and
expel the foreigner and revere the emperor. Okay, it's that movement. Important movement. Okay, it's the ones that basically spell the death knell off the shogunate government. The Sonoji movement gained traction, especially in the Tozama districts / daimyo whose previously unfavourable position now gave them access to foreign technology and arms. It also led them to dispute the foreigners most. So when we look at it, so Tozama, okay, would be sitting at the southern end of Japan here and the northern end, okay? So previously that was a really, really horrible place to be in because you had to travel all the way down to Edo here. Now it's a really good position to be in because that's where all the Western ships, the British, the American, the French ships are all going. And now those daimyo who had the previously really bad position are in the best position to buy weapons and arms from the Westerners. So even though they really, really hate the Westerners, and they're the ones that are starting the fights with them, they're the ones that are getting all the Western rifles and cannons. Okay, not a good mix. For the first time ever in recorded history, the emperor summoned the shogun to Kyoto to answer for his failings and expel the foreigners. So the emperor's basically calling bullcrap on the shogun and saying, can you do it or not? The shogun knew he could not do this. However, the pro-imperial clan, the Choshu that was meant to say, started firing upon Western ships, causing them to invade. The Westerners then blamed the shogun for this and demanded more from him. So the Imperials are basically stirring up trouble because, well, they like to. And they're basically saying, no, let's fight the Westerners now, let's fight the Westerners now. So the Westerners attack, the Imperials attack the Westerners, but then the shogun gets blamed for the Imperials' attack because the Westerners basically look at that and go, your country, your problem, you pay us, you fix it. Okay? They don't see the two as two separate factions. They just see them all as Japanese. Okay? What's the end result for this? Shogunate forces were defeated in open battle after Choshu and Satsuma domains, whilst attempting to bring them into line. So the shogunate basically marches their army into Choshu and Satsuma domains, which sits around here in Japan, the southern end. Okay? And the shogunate forces just get absolutely wiped out. For the first time, the shogunate cannot bring stability to their own country. People were in open rebellion against them. This leads to the shogun being included in a council of daimyo. So the shogun has to accept that he's no longer the ultimate authority in the land, and he basically has a big council of daimyo and he says, I'll be one of this council and we'll work together to fix the problem. This council, however, is stacked with pro-imperial daimyo. Okay, the ones that all hate the shogun in the first place. This council betrayed Shogun Yoshinobu, and he took pro-Tokugawa armies to Kyoto to capture the emperor. So basically they voted him out of the council almost immediately, and he went, oh no, if you're going to do that, I'm just going to take my armies and I'm going to take the emperor back and bring him back into line. Okay? Ronin, happy there was finally a use for them, joined both sides. The Ronin are ecstatic. They're like, finally, something to die for. Okay, they've been waiting forever for this civil war. Okay? These armies, however, are quickly overrun in the Boshin War, and the Tokugawa shogunate was replaced by the Meiji imperial government. Okay? The Tokugawa shogunate very quickly gets wiped out in the Boshin War. Why? Because they're deeply unpopular. The Imperials have access to a lot more guns than the Tokugawa shogunate does. And basically, the Imperials, the moment they walk into battle, they fly up this banner, and it says basically the Emperor's on our side. That's basically what it says. Every samurai looks at that and goes, if I go against that banner, I'm effectively declaring war on the Emperor. I like the Shogun, but I don't like him that much. Okay? So they are replaced by the Meiji government. Now, when the Meiji government comes in, this is one of the first things that they do, and it's called the Charter Oath of 1868. Okay, we've seen this one before? Good. Okay? So this is their first declaration, a declaration of intent. This is what they want their government to be like. Okay, this is their end goal result. The first one, deliberative assemblies shall be widely established and all matters decided by public discussion. What does that mean? What do they want?
Democracy.
Yeah, a partial democracy at the very least. They want voting. They want a public institution that will do discussion for them. What would we call that public institution in our country?
Parliament.
Parliament. What do they call it in their one? Starts with a D.
It's not a Duma.
It's not a Duma, no, that's the Russian one. It is, yes, who said that? It's a diet, okay, or a diet. Either one is fine. But spelt like diet, like food diet. Okay? So they start a diet or a diet. Okay? And that's basically their version of Parliament. The Emperor is still at the top, but these guys are the ones that are meant to discuss and solve the problems. Okay? All classes, high and low, shall unite in vigorously carrying out the administration of affairs of state. What does that mean?
Kind of like destroys the social hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, it's destroying the feudal social hierarchy. So previously, samurai always had this entitled position where they would rule the country and they were the warriors. One of the first things that the Charter Oath does, it goes, right, everyone has a chance. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a peasant or you're a chonin, everyone has a chance of moving up the ladder, everyone can effectively participate in government, everyone can join the army. Okay? What do you think that does for the samurai? They've lost their power, exactly. That's the exact thing that they'd be feeling. And they've lost their very, very privileged position of the only warriors in the country. Okay? Because previously, before the Meiji Restoration, what did samurai fight with?
Swords.
Swords. Swords, bows and arrows. It takes a lot of work to actually learn how to use a sword properly and a bow and arrow. You know how much it takes to fire a gun properly? 2 weeks. 2 weeks is all you really need to be able to fire a rifle. Okay? Sure, you need a couple of months of discipline and everything like that, but you can fire a rifle in 2 weeks properly. Okay? All of a sudden, a samurai isn't important. I can either have one guy with a sword and train him for 10 years, or I can have 10 guys with rifles and train them for 2 weeks and send them off. My money is on the 10 guys with rifles. Okay? They've lost their privileged position. The common people, no less than the civil and military officials, shall each be allowed to pursue his own calling so that there may be no discontent. Second verse, same as the first. Okay? Evil customs of the past shall be broken off, and everything based upon the just laws of nature. Basically, we're going to make laws to replace those old silly ones. Knowledge shall be sought throughout the world so as to strengthen the foundations of imperial rule. We need a lot of Western knowledge because we're really behind in knowledge, is what that is saying. Okay? So, one of the last things that Mr. Smith wanted you to look at is the differences between the samurai and the imperial army. Okay? Now, we have a lot of different differences, that's a really bad sentence, okay, between the samurai and the imperial army. First of all, when we look at the samurai army, okay, it's drawn primarily from, when I talk about the samurai army here, what am I talking about?
The rebellion.
Yeah. Okay. When we're talking about the samurai army here, we are talking about the Satsuma Rebellion or the Seinen War. Okay. It occurs in 1877 when samurai from Satsuma Domain rebelled against the government, which they felt had become corrupt and anti-samurai. Okay. Look, I know it's a movie. Okay. I know it's got Tom Cruise. That's enough of a damning judgment already. Okay. But they did get some of the stuff right. Okay, in particular, the feelings that the samurai had that they felt like they were being replaced or pushed out of society. Okay, it's actually not a bad movie. Would recommend.
Oh, we watched it.
You watched it already. Fantastic. Okay. He is actually based off a real guy. Can you tell me what his name was?
The main samurai that you said at the beginning of the lesson.
I mean, it does help that it's on the slide.
Um,
Okay. This rebellion was led by Seigo Tokumari, who was once chief minister of the Meiji government. He's not a nobody. He's not some samurai that appears out of nowhere. He was once the chief minister. Okay. The rebellion was quickly crushed by government forces who greatly outnumbered and outsupplied the samurai forces. It would be the last rebellion against Meiji authority. Okay. So, although it's a rebellion, it's not one that's done out of disloyalty to the emperor or the country. The samurai in the Satsuma rebellion very, very much feel that they're doing the right thing for their country, because they are basically looking at the Meiji Restoration and they feel like Japan's losing its soul. Okay, they're looking at it going, do not westernize. We don't want to be like the Westerners. Okay, if we do that, we're no better than them. Okay, these samurai rebel because they feel disgusted at the growing westernization and modernization of the country. And they also rebel because they've been forced out of their perch position. No longer are samurai important. Now you have a massive peasant conscript army. Everyone's got a rifle. Okay? And these guys are not even in the leading bureaucratic government positions anymore. Nowadays the peasants are sort of shifting them out. Okay? So, let's go back to our table. The differences between the samurai army and the imperial army. Okay, in particular looking at the Satsuma rebellion. Okay, why did the samurai lose? So the samurai are drawn primarily from disaffected samurai who were either bankrupted by the changes in the restoration, unable to cope with the loss of position, or attached to the idea of Bushido. Okay, and primarily at the end of Bushido, it very much focuses on a perfect death, or a death in service to something else. Not every samurai who goes to join the Satsuma rebellion does so because they think they're going to win. They join the Satsuma rebellion, a good number of them, because they know that you're going to die in battle. And they basically look at that and go, hey, end goal achieved. Okay? It's what they want. Okay? The imperial army was drawn from a diverse number of classes and was overseen by officials of the new government, mainly Yamagata Aritomo. Okay, the imperial army is massive compared to the samurai army. Its numbers are limited by caste. Only samurais can join the samurai army. The imperial army has seemingly unlimited numbers due to being drawn from multiple classes. The samurai, its only real supply of Western weapons and arms came from one factory in Satsuma. Okay, now a very common misconception, and this was very much seen in the movie in The Last Samurai, is in The Last Samurai they basically go, oh, we don't use guns because they're dishonourable. Incorrect. Okay? The guns were used by the samurai in the Satsuma rebellion. The problem was they didn't have enough of them. That's why they didn't use them. So they used their guns. Okay, they fired every shot they could, and then they started using their swords. The movie got that very wrong. Okay, the Imperial Army, on the other hand, had a steady supply of Western weapons and arms. They had other factories, and I think if memory serves me correctly, the one factory that they had in Satsuma for the Samurai Army ended up destroying itself or something like that. There was a munition that got produced wrong and it blew up the entire factory. So the samurai quickly found themselves out of guns. Okay? Samurai. Many were Ronin and fought in traditional style or did not have sufficient knowledge of Western weapons and tactics. Some, however, had advised the new imperial army, such as Seigo Tokumari. So yes, the samurai might have access to some guns, but they don't have the training to use them. And the training to use them in a proper army format. Any idiot can shoot a gun. Okay, it's not that hard. Pull, trigger, load, shoot. Okay? It takes a lot of training to actually use those weapons in combination with the people around you. The samurai don't have that. you have samurai basically running up to the Imperial army, taking a shot, then running away, pulling out their sword, coming back, and then trying to load the rifle in between. Okay? Doesn't work. They're still trying to fight in the old samurai way. Doesn't work. Modern warfare does not work like that. You have people dying by the hundreds, not one-on-one sword fights. Okay? The Imperial army is well trained in Western fighting styles and tactics. The samurai are loyal to the emperor, just not the new bureaucracy. They like the emperor. They think he's great. Okay? They do not like all the government officials that now surround him, because they look at them, they go, you're corrupt, and you're not a samurai, and you're not worth obeying. The Imperial army is loyal to the emperor and the new order. The samurai are somewhat popular amongst the peasants due to tradition and the loss of economic position during the Restoration. I would not say the samurai are wildly popular amongst the peasants, certainly not, and I don't think the movie got that right either. Okay? But the peasants at the very least sort of go, the samurai are the old way, we still have a bit of respect for them, and the Meiji Restoration hasn't exactly been the greatest for us. A lot of us just lost our farms. Okay? The Imperial army is popular amongst the shonen because, unlike the shogunate, the Imperial government actually pays its debt. Okay? And that makes them wildly popular amongst the merchants. Okay? What it actually does is the Imperial army, because it's so popular amongst the shonen, means it actually has a very steady supply of money. And money wins wars a lot of the time. Okay? Now, I believe that would be it. So those were the 4 questions that Mr. Smith gave you. Okay? Obviously there's other stuff on the syllabus that we didn't cover, but those are the 4 that he gave me, so those are the 4 I worked with. Okay? Having a look at our syllabus. Are there any questions that you want to ask? Or shall we call it quits? No questions about anything? Girls, congratulations. I think that went for about an hour and a half.
Wow.
Welcome to one of the Saturday sessions that I normally have to do for my classes, which normally go for about 3 or 4 hours.
You did it.
Yay, good work, good work, good work.
Did it
I'd laugh so hard if this was a picture instead of a video.